so that everyone can inherit the true, honest experience to be an American.
So many important things. Thank you for that. I don't want to just repeat what everyone has said. I want to emphasize one thing that Rich said, which is if you're trying to understand where this is coming from, which I guess was the original question there, it has a huge component which is pure political calculation that has nothing to do with grassroots anything, right? There has been a concerted, well-funded effort nationally and on Long Island with organizations like the Long Island Loud Majority and Moms for Liberty, who are very well funded by national right-wing political sponsors to engage people and build political energy for their political benefits. And they don't really care about the kids they're hurting, right? Those are just collateral damage to their political aspirations. When we are trying to message against it, we see that on Long Island, thankfully, book banning is not a popular thing, right? People do not want to think of themselves as book banners. They don't want to think of themselves as racists. That's good. That doesn't mean they aren't racist. I didn't say that. They don't want to think of themselves as racists. So calling out the racism and calling out the way that this affects children who are from these groups that they're trying to marginalize, whether we're talking about kids of color or whether we're talking about kids who identify as LGBTQ+, or whatever it is, or children with disabilities, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion means along all these different spectra. And the one where parents have the easiest time understanding it is when you start talking about disability. And the ones where they have the most trouble are whether you're talking about minority groups, if they're white, and trans kids, because they don't understand about trans kids, right? And I'm the mother of a trans son, so I see it all the time, how people try to grapple with this. And it's a generational thing as well as a cultural thing. So we see those attacks of, you're making my child feel bad for being white. You're making my child feel uncomfortable. Meaning the white cis kid. Because the black kid or the Latino kid or the LGBTQ kid, well, they're supposed to feel uncomfortable because they're not part of the majority, sorry. So we counter that by saying every child deserves to feel like they belong in their school. And I think that's a value sentiment that every parent can get behind. And it's hard for them to come back and say, but, you know, I'll leave it there.
Fantastic, thank you. Let's see. Our next question has to do with curriculum specifically. When we talk about belonging, who belongs, who doesn't, who should, who shouldn't. Obviously, there are some very concrete answers that we should all belong. However, unfortunately, the traditional curricula that we have, that most of us in this room were educated within our K-12 system when we were in elementary and high school, did not embrace various aspects of what it means to be equal and have all aspects of a person's humanity acknowledged. And so our next question has specifically to do with curriculum, and I'll put some judgments on it just so that you can play with them a little bit. Who gets to control it and who doesn't? Who should and who shouldn't? Anybody want to start with that one?
I'll start. So I want to put this in the context of New York State and the New York State Board of Regents. and their 2021 guidelines on diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? So there is a stated mandate from the regents with no teeth behind it whatsoever, but an expectation that every school district will incorporate issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the public schools. We see parents saying they should have a voice, and I'd say, sure, my kids are grown now, but yes, parents should have a voice. But that doesn't mean that each parent gets to say, this is what my kid is going to learn. That's not what a voice looks like. What we want to see is that every school district has a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee that includes parents, teachers, administrators, other community members, and students. And that committee has a voice, provides the voices, provides the opportunity for people to talk about what they want to see broadly in the curriculum. Obviously, teachers make the final decisions on what's in their curriculum. But I think it's okay to get voices. I would like to have a voice in what my kids learn or don't learn. I would like to see them have more diverse, not less diverse sources, right? But I don't think we want to say, oh no, parents have no voice. So I'll hand it over to the experts.
I mean, I absolutely concur with that. I think the issue has been and is which parents are having that voice at the table. As we mentioned from the polls and the survey that I shared and the USA poll, all of these polls talk to parents that care about their children having a strong social justice education, learning about the honest truth, the honest history, but those are not necessarily the voices that are at the table. Certain groups, and let's say,
They're loud.
they are very loud, and so those are the ones that get fed. And what we have to do is not, like who should have a, we know that parents should be able to be a part of that conversation. And I think that what we'll learn because of these polls, that more educators and parents are on the same page when it comes to this honest history and are ready to do that work. There are some parents that are against it, and they're like, I need to have a say so that I can change it. But if we brought all these voices to the table, there will be a conversation, a courageous conversation around what our children need to know to be global citizens. And we'll get to a place where there's a curriculum that actually supports that. And so to do that, we do need more diverse parents at the table, voices at the table, educate, so that they can support the educators that want to help that honest truth. I do believe that as educators, professionals, we go, we learn what the standards are, we develop the curriculum, and most importantly, implement that curriculum. So teachers have to have educators have to have a big say and making that connection. And then parents being able to support what that curriculum is, so that not only are they supporting the curriculum, but they're supporting the learning that their children are coming to school with and hopefully leaving the K-12 experience with.
I just pressed a button. Oh, you can still hear me, great. I think we're all very much on the same page here. I'm going to come back to the MLK quote, one of my favorites that I shared a few minutes ago about, the moral arc of the universe bending towards justice. I definitely believe that. I think we all believe in that arc. But even within the arc, there are inflection points in our history, times when we recognize that we're prepared, or many of us are prepared, not all, to have hard conversations that we weren't having during the more gradual pieces of the arc, right? And to what Nancy was saying before, the Board of Regents and the Chancellor of New York State, basically said, this is one of those inflection points. And we are basically is telling school districts, do not take your foot off the gas pedal just because you're feeling some pressure from outside groups. Like, this is a hard conversation to have for some people, in the same way it was a hard conversation for some people to have in the 60s, or when we fight for women's rights and things like that. But the answer is not to back off because it makes some people feel uncomfortable. Like, that discomfort is a part of progress. But to the question about, who has control over the curriculum or input or anything, again, we are definitely asked by the state of New York to do that, to make sure that we don't tell just one story, and that kids have the opportunity to experience literature and history through the lenses of people who are like them, right? And that version of history, what they're told about history, is inclusive and true, and they feel a part of it. I do agree that there is absolutely a role for parents to play in this. Like, I don't remember who said it, that role can't be, well, I don't want my kid reading this, I don't want my kid reading that. And that's a little bit of what we saw during school board races last year. People taking the mic, the podium, and literally saying that it should be up to them as an individual parent what their kid learns. No, there's 7,500 kids in Half Hollow Hills. There's 17,000 in Brentwood. Like, that's not how systems work, and it never should be how they work if the end goal is to conceal the truth from children, right? So there's a place, an important role that parents play as partners in looking at curriculum, and I do think that is through committees. Where they can be in a room with educators and with students and with administrators and vet texts so that they really fit within the mission of, of teaching a full history of the world and of the U.S. I'll pass it on.
So New York State did say we need to do something, but like you said, it had no teeth. Right? So with culturally responsive, sustaining education, that's what we're supposed to be promoting, right? And with that, the first component that New York State wants educators to do is to make students feel welcomed and affirmed. But that all depends on who's in front of those children when the door is closed. I can teach a text with my door closed and make every student feel like they have a voice about that text, the words on the page, and they feel comfortable. And someone else can teach the same text and every single student squirming in their seats, feeling uncomfortable or turning around to look at the one child that represents that one group that's being talked about in that text. So the first part is welcoming and affirming, but the last part of that culturally sustaining education is to provide support for learning and professional development for the educators, right? There are a lot of people who feel that they're extremely open-minded. They feel like they are welcoming and affirming. And they look at a child that might not be a minority by race or religion, but might be by economic status. And so they might say, oh, because you don't have the schema or the background knowledge or the information that the other students do, we're going to give it to you this way. And so what does that do? That takes the second tenet of this culturally responsive sustaining education initiative. We look at that, and it's supposed to be highly effective and rigorous curriculum with high expectations. Then the expectations are brought down because an educator might be open-minded but feel that this child needs so many different boosters, but when this child might have a rich background, even though they might not have a group of parents or community behind them that have a lot of money. And so then they diminish the opportunities for that student to excel because they poo-pooed them. There's a lot of work that we have to do when we are reflective about not just creating, promoting, and then looking for ways to check to see if it's going on in the classroom, to hold for accountability. There's a lot of work that we have to do to erase some of the things that promoting cultural pride, what it does to people when they think about it, because then the traditional way of looking at that brings shame. It brings fear. It brings hate. And then those open minds close real quick. Or should we say quickly, right? And we have to think about how we're going to unfold and unroll these concepts and ideas, especially if we're all sitting together And we're all of the same background, the same tradition, the same type of thinking, and no one from the outside is saying, this is how my child feels as a minority in this area. Whether it be from the LGBT group, whether it be from a socioeconomic disadvantaged group or a different religious group, it's definitely obvious when it's from a minority race group, right? And then we have what's big on Long Island right now is if you're teaching a book as simple as, a book that just talks about where we're gonna, if we're gonna accept, or if we're gonna be, if we're gonna show acceptance, if we're gonna show that we care, then it comes to the idea and the theme of who's an immigrant, who's an alien, and then everybody turns and looks. That's heartbreaking, shattering, and it kills the vulnerability that's necessary for someone to learn and grow. So we have to learn how to, and I don't want to say the word sensitive or empathetic, but to have a firm understanding that we are all people, we are all humans, we all have a purpose in this world to be global citizens that add value. And if we don't look at it like that, we'll never have high expectations for all that are in that classroom when that door is closed.
Can I chime in just, something that I've been thinking about while listening to everybody, and I really think if we leave here today without talking about this, we'll have missed a really important message for this conversation. But Veronique, I think you had referred to who's on these committees, right? Whose voices are being heard in any given community. And if there's going to be an ask, and there might be one or two before we finish here today, I think that has to be one of them, right? As imperfect as we all are, these groups that brand themselves as the majority in any given community, the ones that are really quick to take the mic with prepared comments and maybe don't even live where you live because they literally have a calendar on the wall telling which activists are going to which school board meetings and what their message is supposed to be, right? Do not represent the majority, in my opinion, of any of the communities on Long Island, right? Yet, they're the most vocal and they're the most present, right? So the simplest first step any of us, I think, can take is to show up, right? Because I know where I work, when people started showing up to say, listen, we are grateful for the work that this school district does in teaching diversity, equity, and inclusion. We appreciate efforts that you make, as imperfect as they might. Like, it sends a message to the delegation that are coming from all across Long Island to try and make it look like the community's angrier than it is, that it's not, right? We can't let a small but loud minority of our communities, of our school districts, act like their voices are the ones that really should drive curriculum. And like I said, the best counter to that is for people who appreciate the work that's being done in their schools to show up, right? Show up, say thank you. Like, take a mic and be like, listen, and we did, and this went on in the spring in our school district. People just came up to the mic and were like, we know that your job is hard. It's hard to be on a school board. It's hard to be a we recognize the challenges that everybody's facing right now coming out of the pandemic and dealing with what's happening in the world around us. Just like, thank you, my kid feels safe here. A little bit of love for school districts, I think, is important right now. People do the best they can, and I do think it's definitely worth acknowledging that they're imperfect in the journey. Absolutely, every one of us is imperfect in the journey. But for educators who might wake up on Monday and look at a flyer from a nearby school district that says that they're indoctrinating children in Marxist propaganda, and then go to bed thinking, gee, I didn't think I was doing that, and then wake up Tuesday and they're being basically told that they're unconditionally racist or something like. The reality is that most of them are really neither. They're somewhere in the middle, like doing the best they can, and need trust at times, and when we err, because we're human and we err, right? For those errors to be opportunities for growth, right? Which means a personal phone call, an email, an outreach. Hey, Mr. Smith, hey, Miss Smith, I saw this thing you sent home the other day, and I got to be honest, like, it didn't sit right with me. Like, and most people will listen. So I think that's really important. Like, we have this incredibly, like, easy role that we can play in our communities just by modeling support, appreciation, and civility as we work through this inflection point in our culture. So.
Thank you for your comment. I think that this is very, you told me an idea that I would actually like to segue into our next, and this is our final question for the panel, because several of you said a really powerful thing about what we can do, what we should do. The last question, ladies and gentlemen, is for the last question, we're going to focus on what actions we can take. We've created and discussed and analyzed and thought about and explained and described the problem, but what are the solutions? So I love that Nancy came up with the idea that every school should have a DEI committee, and then then of course we have to figure out who's going to be on that committee. Full circle into not only this last question for the panel, but ladies and gentlemen, the overarching theme of the entire conference. What can we do? What actions can we take in order to ensure that there is equity within our school system? And how do we incorporate community leaders, community advocates, community opposition even, to ensure that our children are being represented, that they're being made whole in their classrooms. And to that end, our last question has to do with entities within the community, advocates for justice, and what can we do about that. Now, I will start on a negative note because I'm hoping that our panelists can lead us into some positivity. Very disturbingly, within the last 48 hours, thank goodness, not in New York, but in Texas, I can stop right there in Texas. I saw